could you start with your name and your job title, please?
My name is Amol Desai. I'm a data scientist in the tech industry. I analyze the game and publish my work and insights on a blog. And I'm also currently a freelance consultant at CricWiz.
Okay, that's a huge resume. So what an expert to have on. I want to start with something. You wrote this interesting piece, and we'll talk about the piece a little bit. And in the piece, you talk about how cricket has been late to analytics, but that a bit like how cell phones were late to Africa, that also gives you advantages as well as disadvantages.
It does, yeah. So Africa's cell phone ownership rather, in 2002 was in the 15 to 20% range, right? And so Ghana and Kenya were like around 10%. US at that time was 64%. Come to 2014, all of them were in the 80s, so 80%. So South Africa and US matched. So I think I see it as a lesson on being able to leapfrog and not being burdened by accumulated tech debt, headwinds, inertia, um, just being pulled down by this large infrastructure investment that the US had made in like, landlines and so on at that point. So I think there's something to borrow from that learning into what we are looking at with cricket. So it's all great to look at our peers in other sports, look at precedents. A lot of the times we get asked, right? We get asked, like, if we propose something in cricket, use of technology in cricket, use of data in cricket, we often get asked, you know, has this been done in other sports? And yes, it's always good to learn from that precedence. But I think there is enough opportunity for us. Our game is unique. Our needs may be unique, and if we see an opportunity, we should be able to take the lead and kind of drive things forward as well.
And one thing you talk about in the piece is that we're still at the stage where the majority of the people doing this are enthusiasts, not to quote Mr. Srinivasan's son-in-law too much there, but essentially, like, even if you look at someone like me, a lot of people who work at CricViz, a lot of people
Myself,
who've
right?
become analysts for different teams, yourself, a lot of us either weren't full-time when we started, had never done it before, and this was the first job, or part-time, like Dan Weston and Joe Harris and all these different people. There's a lot of enthusiasm for cricket analytics, but there's not a lot of professionalism at the moment, is there?
Yeah, so there's a need to decipher quality versus quantity. There's a lot of people who put a lot of work out there. There's people on Twitter, tweeting quote unquote insights all the time, right? Especially when games are going on and so on. Um, but you need to understand that any person or set of people don't represent the field. So there's a couple of things for people making decisions based on what they see. So one is not to get too eager, but also not to be dismissive of early failures, right? So for the enthusiast community, I think there's a lot to be done to kind of empower them, right? Empower them with data, empower them with motivation, with challenges, empower with some rewards, maybe exposure, right? There's a lot of like analysts right now, or what I call guerrilla analysts on Twitter and other forums. They put out a lot of good work, and if you notice, like I think Flighted Leggy and then a couple of others had posted some good analysis, and Sky Sports took it up, or at least mentioned them. I think Sharda Ogra at ESPN Cricket also mentioned it in one of the podcasts that she was doing. It is encouraging for people like us. It kind of that is one form of motivation, and these are like, this is being done in an ad hoc manner right now, but you could channelize all of this energy and do it in a more systematic way, right? And there's a lot to be leveraged and harnessed here. There's, on the data side of things, there's something to be said about the availability of data, and we can talk a lot more about that. A lot of the people like us who started, we invested a lot of time in just getting a data set that we could use for the work that we do. And folks keep on reinventing the wheel even today, right? So I did a piece on Akshar Patel last year, and I scraped some Hawkeye data from the BCCI website. Now, after I did that, I got tons of
Sorry,
requests. Yeah. Good.
Just is there a sniper red dot on your forehead now that you've said you're stealing from the BCCI?
Maybe there is. Maybe there is. But that's I'm not stealing from the BCCI. It's from their public website, so it's all good, right? Um, yeah. So, but once I did that, there's like a ton of people who kind of
Mm.
reached out to me, asked where I got the data, how they can get it. Some people are already getting the data, and then they reached out and said, how do I decipher this column and so on. So, like, these people are all redoing the work that I had already done. I probably redid
Mm.
the work at that point as well. Uh, this can be coordinated, right? We don't need to be doing this. There is something to be said about being able to incrementally build on other people's work.
And you talked about kind of three different groups within the
Mm,
sort of the cricket community as a whole. So the first one is the one that's already using stats, which is the sort of people that you're talking about who are on Stats Guru or where have grown up reading those sorts of articles, and especially a lot of the American people who have followed American sports are more used to that. Then you've got the sort of old school group who think that stats are unreliable, who don't necessarily believe that stats are important in cricket. Apparently, they haven't looked at the fact that we mark the game in runs yet. And then you have the third group, which is the practitioners, which is kind of what you're talking about with these enthusiasts coming through, who are in some cases maybe overly devoted to it. I mean, one of the big things that I suppose I learned very early on was that there's no magic number, which is something that Nathan Lehman talks about a lot. And the other thing is that it's like there is no way to be able to tell, and you and I know this because we've done a lot of this in our work. We don't really know what the pitch is going to do. We
right.
know perhaps what it has done beforehand, and that's about the best case. So you have those sort of three groups, and that's sort of a lot of the cricket community is sort of split between those three at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah, and the third, that actually reminds me of boundary percentage, which goes around a lot these days. It as like this one number that we should use to judge players. Yes, it's a good indicator, but to your point, there's a lot of other things to look at. So yeah, going back to the three types of people. The first one, I think it's not just people who wrote Stats Guru and people who people who are entrenched in the field. A lot of what I kind of so these are people who think they are using data, and they think they are using data to the full, right? So these and in just talking to people, interacting with people in the cricket world, it seems like a lot of these people are actually making decisions, and a lot of people are running teams and so on, right? And it's you can't at this time in cricket believe that you are already leveraging data to its full. Like baseball
Mm.
is finally they're kind of saying that we are finally getting saturated with just using the data that we have with event data, that is. But baseball has been doing this for what? Moneyball came out 20 years ago. It
Yeah, well,
took that long.
sabermetrics is 20 years beforehand. So
Yeah,
yeah, so it's
exactly.
almost a
Like
40-year
right,
industry at this point.
right. Uh, and they still say there's more to do with minor leagues, with colleges, with high school baseball, and so on.
Mm.
They are actually just getting started with Hawkeye data and biomechanics and things like that. So there is still more to do for them. And so at this point, we should be actually looking and saying and looking out for where we should invest in, rather than saying we are done. We are already doing this. We don't need your help. Like
Mm.
that's the wrong attitude. The second type of people are, like you said, they're the ones. They don't believe that stats are reliable. Stats and data are reliable. They don't want to go to stats. They want to work with insights and instincts and so on, right? And to an extent, they're right, right? You cannot be truly data driven because the data isn't good enough to be truly data driven like you can be in other industries. There is a lot more uncertainty in sports, and you that's something that you kind of need to understand and bring to the fore. But like I think mentioned in the piece, uncertainty isn't introduced by the data; it is just exposed by the data, and it helps you
Mm.
understand that uncertainty, right? So there's like, if you're interested in some of this, like you can actually use data to kind of build up your instincts, and then use your instincts. It's all right. It's good to use instincts, Daniel Kahneman has a great book on this, right? Thinking Fast and Slow. He talks a lot about two different types of thinking and decision making and so on. So, and then there's like the third type of people, practitioners, who don't know what they don't know. And along with this, I would also club people who kind of consider who talk in terms of those stats guys or girls, and they do their magic. They throw things across the board, across the wall, and that's the end of it, right? There a lot of people in video in TV commentary these days talk in these terms. They will talk about matchups, and they will talk about things that those stats guys, those people in technology will do or do today, and that's kind of where it is, right? So I think I would club those two types of people maybe together. Like one of my favorite examples here, or pet peeves rather, is matchups. Right? We got matchups from baseball, and they're all good. I mean, if they're done well, they're useful, they're good. But then you get a game like Bangladesh the other day, right? Then you get people talking about matchups between two players, regardless of whether they have faced each other for 10 balls, 100 balls, 500 balls. Nothing matters at that point. This guy does this against this other guy. That's our conclusion. That's what we will do to make decisions, and that's where we kind of go down that slippery slope of and it hurts us. It hurts
Mm.
credibility. It hurts, like, it hurts the use of data in cricket. So yeah, that's I guess what I have to say about it. And I guess one more thing, like, so I just heard somebody mention it the other day. And so if someone says AI at this point, with the amount of data and the type of data we have, like, just walk away.
I mean, the matchups is. I found that really interesting. I think the first time I looked through a data set was an IPL season. The most balls I found was Kuldeep Yadav bowled 23 balls to David Warner. And then I looked and I couldn't find another season where anyone had even faced that many balls from one ball. And then I went and looked at baseball. If you're in the same division as a pitcher in baseball, you're going to face way more
Right.
pitches from someone. Maybe less so over the last couple of years of baseball because no one pitches more than 2 innings now. But in the old days when you had people doing that, and so it's something that we brought across that didn't work. The other thing is, and obviously I've worked more with teams than you have, but you have to understand the people that you are dealing with. This is like, I've made this joke many times, but it's not actually a joke. It's factually correct. Most cricket coaches have Hotmail accounts. Now, when I know that you're an advanced computer person, and I'm not quite at that level, but I know that Hotmail is not exactly the if you've got a Hotmail account, you basically started using the internet 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's probably been hacked. Probably everyone who's has hacked it in the world. I think I could hack a Hotmail account at this point. Um, and the same with the older players coming through. And I've had this conversation with many older players before. I remember one player saying to me, I don't get it because you guys tell me all this data, but then the next game I'm in, everyone bowls at my hip, right? And won't that just change the data?" And I had to show him, and I was like, "Well, here's 900 balls that you faced. Let's have a look at the 12 balls that you faced that were at your hip in that one particular game. How's that going to change the overall information that we have on you?" And that's not having a go at this player. This is a smart player trying to understand it. But he's not from this environment. He doesn't understand it. So there's certainly, I know for me, there's certainly a lot of cricketers and coaches who are not literate at it. As you said, a lot of the commentators are not literate. Some of the things they say, and I think, oh no, that's going to make us sound awful. That's not what we should be saying at all. So there needs to be an overall improvement in the way that we talk about analytics and the way that we talk about information in cricket. But 5 years ago, most of the stuff that is on TV now wasn't even mentioned. So we've already had a big jump forward just in the last couple of years.
Yeah. And Jared, you don't have to be literate. You just have to be open minded, right? Yeah. There's a lot that needs to be done in terms of, like, relationship building, looking at data analysts as partnership, not as a service, right? Yes, there might be too many cooks. I mean, once you start looking at it as a partnership, are they part of the decision making team, the think tank, as they call it, right? Yes, there might be too many cooks in the kitchen, but we need to figure out a way to kind of work with that and see how. I mean, there might there's a lot of things that we can do that from an organizational perspective, but it is a partnership, right? And it helps both ways. It helps analysts also be they are illiterate in a lot of ways as well, as far as the game is concerned. There's a lot that people like us need to learn about the game, how it's played, about challenges within, and both technical challenges within the game, but also social challenges and peer pressure and pressure of expectations and on all of these kinds of things. Uh, Things like not taking a single off a certain bowler, like that. It's not just a technical decision necessarily. There could be a lot of other things that are associated with it, and it's good for us to kind of understand and build that empathy as well. Um, Also, it kind of gives and I heard this from a lot of people within American sports as I was writing this up, right? Uh, it avoids building this echo chamber within the analytics team. Because
Mm,
otherwise, what happens is there is no good way to vet the work that the team does, and the coaches and the team in general doesn't have that buy-in from the work that is done. And so no matter what kind of quality analytics work is produced, if it's not part of your operational workflows, if it's not in within your decision making process, it is useless.
mm.
So I think there is this relationship to be built, and as part of that, I mean, one thing that one of the people that I was talking to, and he's worked with a few teams. He's also taught courses in universities and so on. Um, he actually mentioned, and I'm just quoting, like he said, every interaction is an opportunity to learn and to educate, and not an argument to be won. And I would actually add to this, like there is also interaction that needs to be done in the off season. Like these interactions don't just need to be done in the month or two that the IPL is played for, or a World Cup is played for, whatever the tournament is, right? There's but there is a lot of prep time that leagues get these days, at least, because there's only a few leagues around the world, and there's a lot of opportunity for these relationships to be built during that downtime as well.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I think that's where the American system is so different to cricket, and it's worth pointing out some of the reasons why analytics has been a little bit slower in cricket. Like
Mhm.
international teams are basically government run. I know they're not quite government run, but that's they don't have, they're on their own. There aren't four other Indian cricket boards. It's like one. There's they only need to be the best Indian cricket board. They don't need to be in the free market. You then have private ownership, which is quite new, and also the kind of private ownership we have. I call these T20 leagues pop-up leagues because they're not full time. So almost every job I've ever had, I've never been paid for like more than 3 or 4 days before the tournament starts,
Mm.
which means that I can't do all the work that I am doing the kind of analysis work during the tournament more often than not that I should have done a month earlier, and having to scratch around and everything. And so there are differences within cricket that have held us back a little bit, which might eventually, as you say, there might be benefits as well. Like if you do have maybe 4 or 5 great analysts in the world who travel around and they're in the Caribbean and then they're in South Africa, then they're in Australia, then they're in India. They might learn things that an NBA analyst will never learn just because the NBA analyst is just working in one field. So there are advantages to it, but there are certainly disadvantages to the way that cricket is run when it comes to furthering analytics, I think.
It is, yeah, and boards kind of hold this back as well, right? I mean, it's you can actually see this in the game itself, the quality of cricket that is being played in the World Cup right now, which is government board run boards playing
Mm.
against each other, versus the cricket that's played in some of the leagues around the world. It's a little bit different, right? And the it's it's almost different also in the players' minds. I mean, yes, you are playing for the country, and there's this, that gives you a different platform and a different sense of pride and so on. But then the quality of cricket itself and the thought process is in some cases quite different. The other place where I think this kind of comes into play is like the example that you gave, Jarrod, is you started analyzing or producing analysis for teams late in the game, so maybe a couple of days before the tournament started, and I'm sure a lot of the work that you were doing initially was even just getting the data into the right place in the right form and so on. So
Color
this,
coding.
yeah, yes, and this takes you back to like who owns this data, right? Today, it has to take. We have to gather the data from different places. Like, is there a central ownership for the data? There is none in cricket. It's for somebody new who wants to get into the game or get into the analytics game in cricket. They have to start from scratch, and it's not just them. You're basically saying that it's people like you who's actually working with teams as well that have to do some of this. And so I think it starts there, and then you can kind of go deeper and deeper and kind of come up with these differences. But for the MLB and the NBA, the MLB owns data, the NBA owns data. They make it available available freely, like it's open source. You can get it now and start chugging away. So I think the difference starts there.
Just on that, I was told by an agent in cricket that he could get me a lot of work if I just had access to video. And I was like, why would I pay for video myself when that is what cricket teams should be doing? It
Right.
doesn't make any sense. That's such a backward way of looking at things. Just on the league thing, I think it's really interesting. As you said, there's a few leagues around the world that have open source data. Our biggest problem is that we don't even have one league.
Yeah.
Like, if I know I've talked to the Big Bash about this, 2017, 2018. And Anthony Everard, I think, was the running the Big Bash at that time, and he was like, "Yeah, that's what we want to do. We want to be the open source league." And they haven't done it. I talked to the 100. At one stage, the 100 were whispering to me that they wanted me to run like an open stats page for them, and there was going to be more data and everything. Well, that didn't happen because they ran out of money. The IPL doesn't particularly do anything. The ICC doesn't release anything, and so you're in this situation where because we don't have one unifying league who's sort of in charge of everything, which is cricket's problem for everything, not just analytics. But because of that, it's held back. And so you need so many, you need to, the amount of people who just contact me going, where do you find this information? And I'm just like, I think I should tattoo Crick Sheet on my arm at this point to let people know that's to find it. But that might have even been how you originally contacted me, was just like, how do you get hold of this information? And it's so frustrating because I know how many smart people there are out there who would be able to do great things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's basically kind of where it starts. Honestly, like we have to make sure that the data is available in a more standardized format in general, right? And because we don't have that, we also have companies that have the data and they hold the data, and in some ways, a lot of their business is that they have the data. It's not what they do with the data. It's that they have the data, and so there is some incremental stuff that they might be doing on top of it, but their business model may not kind of cater to using the data well.
The other thing that you talked about, and you should talk about, mention it there when you talk about the businesses, but there is also, we have a lot of in-house analytics teams in the IPL, for instance, and with international teams. But we also have a lot of external companies now, Sports Mechanics and CrickViz and Kadamba, Opta, obviously. Although I don't know if Opta quite count as that, but they have information that you have to pay for as well. When you looked at the American sports, I know that does happen at times in American sports. Is this something that will work for cricket, having external companies and in-house companies going at the same time?
Yeah, I think it's different levels of maturity. So what I heard in American sports is this, right? So there's a lot of when new teams come up, uh, they are either not able to afford having an in-house team, or that their in-house team is not yet up to speed. And in that case, in those kinds of cases, having a third party come in helps them up level themselves and kind of compete with the other more mature teams in the league. Uh, And then there's like a mature state of this where third parties are still useful. A lot of their tooling is used as cross-check tool in these cases where essentially teams are coming up with hypotheses and using these tools to check. Now, why are they doing that? That's because third parties can fund a lot more in time and people, and so they can do a lot more deeper research. They can build, better tooling. They can spend on building this better tooling. They can come up with standardized common building blocks that teams can then leverage and pull into their workflows, right? So it's set up in that mature state. It's set up more as a complementary relationship where in-house teams know more about the problem, and this is also a matter of preference, right? They know more about the problem, but they also think they know more about the problem that is specific to them. They want to kind of build up their own secret sauce because now everybody has access to the third party. And so how do you differentiate? You differentiate by building your in-house team and kind of incrementally building on top of it to solve the problems that you care about. And you know and then they work on more of the firefighting kind of stuff like strategy and coaching aids and so on, whereas the third party does a lot of the research in that kind of once you hit that level of maturity.
And I know that you've talked to teams, the same as I have. You've you probably know more now than you maybe even did before you started contacting teams and chatting to teams. You talked about, I didn't realize this, some NFL and NHL teams only have 1 and 2 person analytic teams. The biggest analytic team, the sort of new build, was going to be the 100, where they were going to have 7 analysts per team. I think they ended up with 2 analysts per team and maybe 1 in the women's 100, although I'm not 100% sure on how many they had in the women's, but it certainly wasn't 7. Um, and, I think that you and I have talked about this before, but how do you think is the best way of building an analytics team for cricket?
Yeah. So one thing, because there are so many vendors in cricket, because the data is not freely available, and it is spread out across. The sense that I have in the way analytics is run in cricket today is that you have these multiple vendors. Everybody is farmed a question out, right? So you send a question to team A, you send a question to team B, send a question to team C, it comes back. You somehow try to make sense of it together. There is a strong need for coordination across vendors, across third parties, across analysts and coaching staff, right? Somebody needs to
Mm.
kind of sit there and figure out what to do with all of this information in a coordinated fashion rather than answering these things in isolation. Today, if you look at teams focusing on the draft or on the auction in the case of the IPL versus coaching and strategy. Now, those two questions are driven as separate questions. I I don't think they should be driven as separate questions. Eventually, they merge together. One feeds the other, and so on. So I think the I think there's a strong need for coordination. Um, the other thing that we kind of see here is the size of the team, right? And then, like as you pointed out, the NFL and the NHL are kind of early in the data game, I would say, as compared to NBA or MLB, and they do start off with 1 or 2 people on the team. Um, Baseball has a lot more, right? Baseball has more than a
Mm.
dozen. Most teams have more than a dozen people. I think some teams have close to 20 people on an analytics team. So at that point, it is like running a small tech company, really. And so they are doing a lot of the data engineering, the data crunching, tooling, building tooling, and so on as well. And so again, like when your team grows like that, there's a lot of coordination to do. There's a lot of prioritization to do. Baseball has actually this position called a coordinator. So I talked to folks whose title it was that they were directors of research or coordinators, right? And
Mm.
so these are actually positions that have been created, and it's somebody's job to go in and do this. So yeah.
The other thing that baseball's doing, and it's probably quite new, and it may not have come up in your research, is they're trying to get ex-players involved in working with the analytics teams. So if there's an ex-player who has a maths background or ex-player who studied science or an ex-player who's just really curious about that sort of thing. Because and this is, I think, where I had an advantage over a lot of other analysts is, even though I'm not an ex-player, I spent so much time around cricket and playing it and talking to players that I kind of understand the language to, 75 to 80% of it compared to a lot of analysts. There's a lot of stuff that is actually quite helpful to know when you're putting these things together. And that was the other big thing. And you talk about that a little bit in the piece, the sort of the mix of knowing about cricket and the mix of knowing about data science. So any team you kind of put together needs a combination of both. There's some great analysts in cricket who couldn't tell you exactly what an off cutter is and would not be able to bowl you one or help a coach, help a captain with one. And there are other analysts who are absolutely brilliant at that. But like literally anything above an Excel spreadsheet is going to terrify them.
Yeah. So there's three different types of work streams here, right? We're talking about scouting, we're talking about strategy, we're talking about research. Research can happen in the off season. Strategy is more related to firefighting. Scouting also happens, it's slow burning and it happens more towards the drafts and so on. And you need different types of skills in general to kind of address these different work streams. It's I find that it's easy to find people who can build models and work with the data. So do the research, do the model building, build models for analyzing scout reports and taking them into account, and how you take data, build an understanding of player valuation, and then overlay scouting on top of it. Now there you start getting into more and deeper levels of I guess you need to understand the game at a deeper level, and then you get aid, right? So this all gets pulled into this coordination effort again, where you as an analyst, yes, you need to know how to build models and work with data, but you need to understand cricket, or you need to be able to work with people who understand cricket. That's scouts, that's coaches, that's ex-players, whoever that might be. And when it comes to these people, now we go back to the previous point that we talked about, data literacy, right? So how do you coordinate all of this and you communicate with all of these people? And it's not the same language that you can use across the board. So the, as you see here, like it's easy to find somebody who can build models and work with data. Harder to find somebody who does that and knows cricket. Harder yet to find somebody who does all of that and can coordinate and communicate. And I guess on top of that, you can layer another skill of, like, how do you build teams as you become more mature? How do you grow from this 2% analyst team to like a 20% analyst team, or something like that? So it becomes rarer and harder to find people who can kind of do that, increase or go down that increasing level of complexity or path. And what I heard from a lot of people, even within these sports that we think, in cricket, we think American sports are very mature when they talk about data and building teams and having teams and so on. But they also talk about having lots of volume in terms of applications, lots of people who are mildly interested, but may not possess all of these skills. Lots of people who are not able to, like, they are able to build models. Yes, they do really well with that. They are great at math, but how do you kind of apply that? Is that next level? And so there is a sense of, like, yes, there's a lot of volume and a lot of applications, but they may not possess all the skills. And in that case, how do we enable these people? How do we encourage these people? How do we set up training programs? How do we kind of give them a growth path? And this happens in all industries. But I think in the sports industry, we are a little bit impatient sometimes on providing these opportunities and setting up these growth paths and careers for people. So you have these, and then on the other hand, you also have, and I see this in cricket as well, there's a lot of skilled hobbyists that are really hard to access. There's so many people who've written blogs or tweeted something, or regularly tweet something, and that seems interesting, that I've reached out. I know you've reached out to some of them as well. I'm not well recognized, you are. And both of us have had the same results. They haven't responded, right? And so there is that aspect as well. But we can that's something that we have to prioritize. Do we want these people on board? And if so, how do we incentivize them to kind of respond and come on board and help out the game, um, or at least get involved in the game? Maybe help out the game is a little bit pretentious, but that or people who are already there but may not be as skilled, how do we help them up level themselves and build a path for them?
Yeah, and part of the problem with everything that you just said, which is a perfectly reasonable way of dealing with it, is that people don't want to invest in analytics teams within sport, and so you'll be shocked to know that my fee is probably slightly higher than a lot of analysts out there, and teams won't even come near you because they're just like, well, we can find someone else to sit in the corner with the laptop. So I'm not saying you can't, but I think I have other skills and have, and have other things that are worthwhile. But there's not a lot of money in this at the moment. Most of the people who are doing it have either picked up very good jobs with national teams, and so that they can do a little bit of freelancing and franchise work, or they're people like me who have other jobs either in cricket or outside of cricket and can pop in and out whenever they want to. Like, if you go down this path, you're going to have to make a lot less money. I don't know if you've told your wife this yet, but you're going to have to make a lot less money. That's a realistic thing for the where we are going with analytics. Even as we get more and more people involved, if it's not taken seriously, so that we start to pay people properly, that's going to cause us problems down the road anyway.
Yeah, so this was a prominent question for people that I talked to. I talked to a bunch of folks, and some of them had gone from technology to sports, and so I had specific questions for them. And then I think I had a couple of people who went from sports back to technology, and so pay was a big thing that came up, and a lot of people who just recently finished their PhDs and stuff, and now they're working in sports, but they know what they are missing out on, or they know that they're missing out on in terms of pay, but they know that they know about the trade-off that they're making, right?
Mm,
And consistently, I think they reported at least 30 to 50. But one person said, I took a 50% pay cut, and I'm still the highest paid person in the league. So that's where we are at, right? And so that is with that, it's really hard to incentivize good talent to come on board. Like,
mm.
you have to be really passionate about what you're doing. Um, Even like, if I just take my example, right? I've been doing this for quite a while now, and it is not easy. Like, I've been putting in nights and weekends and commutes and that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, it's not easy to keep up for a lot of people, and so what happens is there's new people who try to get on board. They're just out of college, they have a lot of time, but as soon as life catches up with them, they realize that they're not just not, like, passionate enough.
Mm.
Are you still there? Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm still there. Can you
Okay.
hear me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of it. Until it's a proper career, the enthusiasts that we talked about will continue to push hard because they're the ones who are desperate to be involved and love it. But it really needs to be a combination of enthusiasts and skilled professionals, I think, for it to go forward. Um,
Yeah. I mean,
I'm very sorry. Go.
yeah, I mean, there's new people who are willing to work for a lot less, and so, especially for short periods of time, right? So they come in, and then what? Like, they actually sometimes end up setting the bar low as well, because they are willing to work for less, and people get their work done. And then there's churn. So they come in, there's churn. You have to retrain this other person. There's actually cost to this that people who are making these investments maybe don't necessarily understand, right? Because yes, you will pay somebody more, but then if you retain that person, if you grow that person, that person's going to pay you dividends. Whereas if you're going to pay somebody else, there's going to be more churn. They're going to leave. You're going to have to train somebody else again. You're going to have to set up this whole system from scratch. You give up on incremental progress by doing that. So I think Dan Weston also, he wrote a piece recently on this pay gap. There is you wrote something similar on the coaching side of things, if I'm not wrong, a while ago, on assistant coaches not being paid enough. And I think all of that, like, it's very similar in essence to what we're talking about here.
Yeah. No, I mean, honestly, I think everyone should just hire sports journalists because they're used to making so little money that they won't even notice the lack of money in these other things. Uh, Thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Jarrod. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.